Good afternoon. Welcome to Research Town Hall, focusing on the ramp-up efforts at the University of Virginia. I'm Ramasubramanian, Vice President for Research, and I will be hosting this event. Liz and I will be making opening remarks, and I will talk about the ramp-up process for about 20 minutes. Then we plan to answer questions. We have received nearly 60 questions already from the research community. We will try to answer some of them at the end of the presentation. We have enabled the Q&A feature in Zoom for this town hall. You should be able to submit your questions through that, as well as askresearch@virginia.edu, and we will address them after the event. This event is being recorded and will be available on our website soon. 2 months ago into the COVID-19 pandemic, we are beginning to look at ramping up on our on-grounds research. The return to research laboratories will be phased, deliberate, and guided by public health advisories, and will require detailed pre-return planning on the part of everyone involved. Our overarching goal is to protect and support our community, both by minimizing the risk and extent of viral infections, and by finding safe and creative ways to reintroduce research previously put on hold. Our provost, Liz Magill, has been able to join us today. Liz has been working around the clock with the president, senior leaders, including vice presidents and the deans, the fall 2020 committee, and our staff members to manage the COVID-19 crisis. Liz and I have been closely working on the research ramp-up plan, and her input from the broader institutional context has been extremely valuable in shaping this plan. The input of the deans and the associate deans of research and schools have been extremely helpful as well. I now invite Liz to address this town hall and kick this off.
Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ram. It's great to be here today. I hope everyone is safe and healthy in this challenging and difficult time. I'm going to make really brief remarks so there's adequate time to walk through the ramp-up plans and also for the Q&A portion of this town hall event. I do want to start by saying I have a very deeply held belief in our research mission as a university. I think it's a core and essential part of our mission. I suspect if you are here today, you already agree with me. So let me preach to the choir. I believe that the production of knowledge and its dissemination, well, first of all, it's what gets me up in the morning. And I think it's has long been and will be long into the future responsible for extraordinary advances in the human condition and the health of this planet. And I think this crisis, this pandemic, has only deepened the need for great discovery and research. So I hope I'm among fellow advocates of that today, and I don't doubt that at all, and I know Ram is a champion. I think the belief in this mission of research was actually a driving force in me saying yes to coming to UVA and being able to work with all of you and Ram and the deans and Dr. Kent to facilitate and support the research that you are doing. If you'll permit me a brief aside about Ramasubramanian, he's been a leading voice in this institution and across our AAU peers when it comes to planning and responding to this crisis. His thorough and his thoughtful approach has been quite central to our own planning, and also he's been a leader nationwide. So if I haven't said it enough, I want to say thank you, Ram, for everything you've done, both as a national leader and as a leader at UVA. So the past 8 weeks have been incredibly challenging on so many dimensions, and in particular for many, although not all, I think, of our researchers. Challenging for everyone, but this COVID crisis has in particular disrupted the research efforts of many of our researchers. I try to think about what it would have meant to me as a faculty member when I spent my time doing research, which was mostly archival and use of databases. If someone told me with 24 hours notice that I had to flatten the curve and really impede my research and those research assistants who were helping me, I would have been devastated, and I expect all of you who faced that have been devastated as well. So while we've been working very hard on research continuity and advancing and continuing our research mission along with our teaching and our clinical mission, of course, we've had a commitment to protecting the health of our students, faculty, staff, researchers, and our Charlottesville neighbors. And the commitment to flattening the curve is what led us to where we were, and now that we're trying to ramp up out of. For many of you, I know our plans about ramping down the research enterprise really became somewhat difficult with the on-grounds labs and the use of graduate students in those labs. I interacted, and Ram interacted with many of you, and actually many of your PhD students one-on-one to find the right path forward to both recognize their own commitment to research, the role that they played in your labs in doing your research, and also recognizing that first and foremost, they are our students, and our obligation is to educate them. So moving forward, we need all your help. Ram has already gotten a lot of your help. We're thinking about how to resume operations, more than thinking about it, have quite detailed plans that Ram is going to share with you. And then we'll try to take the questions you have, and after the webinar, continue to answer those questions in the coming days. So let me turn it back to you, Ram, with thanks for allowing me to be here and to be with you all today.
Thank you, Liz. And your support and participation is extremely crucial. And as the Chief Academic Officer, truly your support and wisdom is helping us get through this. Thank you. With that, I'm going to share my screen and then go through briefly our plan. So let me go through the screen too. Share. Okay. Our goal is to ramp up UVA's research activities in a timely, safe, and sustainable manner. So as I go through the presentation, you will see that we have paid attention to all these three factors. We will be discussing on-grounds research ramp up, especially the laboratory and studio-based research, additional guidelines for field-based research and off-grounds research that depend on travel regulations, availability of archives, as Liz mentioned, and access to remote sites and their policies will be discussed in a ramp-up document that will be shared with you shortly after this town hall. So let me discuss, as we went through this planning, we had to establish guiding principles as to what are we trying to do here and how. And the first and foremost is only research activities requiring physical presence on grounds should take place on grounds. All other activities should continue to be carried out remotely through telework. That is our current university directive and consistent with the stay-at-home order. The second is critical and key research will be ramped up first. This is consistent with the governor's executive order that is in effect right now, expires June 10th, that in effect allows for critical research. So we can go ahead and plan for this ramp up under those guidelines. So we have to be mindful of what research are we trying to ramp up. Ramping up will occur in phases. So let me explain what these phases are. Phase 1 is key research continuance under stay-at-home order, which is currently happening. So in other words, we are in phase 1 where designated faculty and staff continue to work on key research in labs under social distancing requirements. Now, under this phase 1, in preparation for moving on to phase 2, which is where we want to get to, the VPR office continues to build business process infrastructure, secure supplies that we need, working with operations team, assist schools and work with them in developing a ramp-up approval process that is specific to the schools. Every school is different, every discipline is different. So we have to make sure that your needs are met at the level of your school, and integrating all that information across the schools. So moving to phase 2, where we are aiming to go next, is a low density laboratory and research workspace occupancy on grounds. This is achieved through a school level approval process and monitoring. The graduate students may be included in this phase. Densities and specifications will be discussed in this ramp-up guidance document that I said will be going up on the website. So those are the details that we will share with you through the document. The phase 3 is medium density. There's ramping up density, provided there are no new infections, et cetera. That will be consistent with the university policy as to what the next, moving to the next stage will be. And phase 4 is normalcy, which I think is the future. So what I have shown highlighted in blue is the topic of our discussion today. What are the activities that we are doing in preparation for going to phase 2, and how are we going to get to phase 2, and how we are all going to work together in achieving that. So, how should we move to phase 2? So in order to do that, we should establish first clearly what the safety guidelines are. Establish a ramp-up request approval process. So if we ask a lab a researcher with a bunch of graduate students, they should know what information is needed that they should put together and who approves it. The process should be in place. And once the process is in place and you go back to the lab to work, and what kind of compliance monitoring mechanisms we should have. So I'll explain all of these topics. Then finally, we want to integrate the approval and compliance data across schools. This is the back-end work that we will do for contact tracing, for instance. So having all the information in one platform is important. And let's talk about safety guidelines. The safety guidelines is primarily based on 3 principles that we know works in this case, in the case of this pandemic. The first is social distancing to meet low density occupancy requirements. The second is personal hygiene, washing hands frequently. So the details will be how frequently should you wash and what are the cleaning requirements before and after work, etc. The social distancing will be the density specification that we will have in the document that will tell you the distancing that you need, the number of people or number of square feet per person, and information of that sort. Then finally, wearing face covering at all times is an important element. I can't emphasize this one enough. We are not only protecting ourselves by wearing face covering, but protecting also others from us. Most of you know that a cough can reach as far as 6 meters and a sneeze can go as far as 8 meters. And these droplets can be in the air for up to 10 minutes. So if you're in the lab or a research space that is not exclusive to you at all times, which is most unlikely, wearing a face covering is required for safety of others, even if no one is there at the time of your work. Now let's talk about the ramp-up request approval process. So what we are envisioning is, and what we are in the process of implementing is that I will explain what you need to prepare just in a few minutes. The PIs prepare a work plan for their lab, and that will be compliant with the safety guidelines. This may involve rearranging equipment, workstations, furniture, etc., to meet these distancing guidelines. And that will determine how many people you can bring into your lab. And again, there's prioritization of what work, which graduate student need to come in. This is at the PI and the school level approval process. Then schools will provide guidance on the information needed in this plan and in consideration of an ramp request that you will produce and process and will be processed for approval. The plan will be reviewed and approved by the schools, and then you are good to go. That's the mechanism that we are thinking about. Okay. The compliance monitoring piece is important. This is a partnership with all of you, and all of us are in this together to bring up research as I said earlier, in a timely, safe, and sustainable manner. Now, I want to focus on this sustainability. Sustainability depends on compliance. It is no good if we all walk in 2 days, 3 people get infected, and and we have to go back to phase 1 or phase 0 is not prudent. So all of this work, painstaking work that we, as a community, that we do, and the part that you play, is to make sure that what we do is going to be sustainable going forward. So if you don't take these safety requirements seriously, you not only jeopardize your research, but also that of others and their personal safety. So what we have mechanisms that we are working on: monitoring personal health on a daily basis, self-reporting, and wearing a face covering at all times, and not coming to work when you have symptoms or part of the compliance process. So as PIs, what can you do? While we are working on the infrastructure, policies and procedures, fine-tuning all of this for a ramp up, what can you do as a research leader or a PI? So here is a list of things. It's a lot of information here, but just thinking as a PI myself, prioritize your projects so that your critical projects, remember we said critical projects are permitted, and critical projects, either by nature of your work, the timeliness of the work, the academic needs of the graduate student. There are many criteria that you may use to say that I prioritize project A versus project B. And that should be ramped up first in your lab. Identify personnel that are connected to these critical projects, and then that includes graduate students. Review the safety guidelines that must be satisfied, including spatial density, distancing, etc., that you will see the details. Evaluate if the available space in your lab will accommodate the personnel that you identify in the step number 2, and meet all distancing density safety guidelines. If necessary, reconfigure your space, and if possible, in some cases, if you have a gigantic, heavy optical bench occupying significant part of the room, you can't. But in some cases, yes, you can. So think about those options. That's one of the options available in your design of ramp up, given the safety guidelines that you should follow. Develop a sketch of how your laboratory workspace will be configured and how people will work in that space, meeting the requirements. If necessary, consider using shifts and prepare a schedule for each member and share with on a common platform so people don't accidentally come in. And we will be talking about the entry process, etc. In fact, going back to our guiding principle, researchers that need to be in the lab on grounds should be prioritized. And not only that, it is not that a graduate student having a project needs to be in the lab, so he or she is in. Instead, please look at the number of hours they need to be in to come in, work, collect the data, and leave. That way you can increase your throughput. So it's not just saying 3 students, let them come in. But if you really restrict it to, if they need 4 hours today, 4 hours Wednesday, then you can have additional students. So really plan thoughtfully to make sure that people are there only on the need to be there to collect information, working on the projects hands-on. That can be helpful. And going past that, develop your lab policy for enforcing the distancing guidelines, wearing facial covering at all times, hand sanitizing policies. If your lab coming in, you have to wash your hands with soap, and then you finish your work and you clean these surfaces, etc. This is very specific to a lab. A PI is well positioned to make those policies and make sure that your lab occupants understand and follow. It is essentially, it's your responsibility that your lab personnel understand and comply with the policies so that we can continue to make progress towards even more densification phase 3. So the success of the initial phase is critical. And finally, as you do this, when you ensure that you have all the cleaning supplies you need, if not, flag that to your department or school. I'll talk about the logistics of supplies in just a second. In all of this, your commitment is absolutely essential. The success of this ramp up depends on each researcher placing safety of themselves and the people around them first while conducting their research. In order to reduce risks, this must be a partnership, and compliance is essential. We have complete trust, Liz and I have complete trust that all of us will work together responsibly during this ramp up. And we sure hope that we do not have to resort to very strong punitive measures that to ensure compliance like other institutions have done, revoking lab access, etc. for non-compliance. We have very high expectations of ourselves, and I'm sure you will come through. So the million-dollar question, when can we go to phase one? Phase one to phase two, that is the interface we're talking about. So let me address it head on here. So the answer is, you're going to be disappointed. I'm not going to pull out a date and mark it on the calendar, but I want to assure you that this depends on, we have really thought through and we know exactly the set of things that need to happen, and we are working feverishly to accomplish that. Okay, so please have that confidence in us. So the dependencies are, first, an application process for ramp-up requests. And that is the schools, we have discussed many times, and the schools are developing the process. Now, once they have a process, there's got to be a business way of automating. It's not paper stapled together, drawing stapled together, etc., but just enough automation that we can actually do. We believe that we don't want the perfect be the enemy of the good. So we really want to do it just enough that we can get going with this. Right? Acquisition of adequate supplies. Now, this is thanks to JJ Davis, Colette, and John DeSilva and others. They're working with our EHS. They're really coordinating what's the estimated number of faculty members that would come in, students would come in, how many PPEs, this is like in the case of masks, how much sanitizer is needed, etc. And centrally bring those, and what are the logistics of distribution is something that's being worked on. So we need to get that right, get that in place. And our EHS is also developing a 10-minute video so that all of these safety recommendations, guidelines will be walked through in that, and you will be able to essentially go through the training, your lab members, and then like any other training, compliance training that we have, you're asked a question, and then you, once you say you met those requirements, then you are ready to go into the lab, subject to approval by the schools. We will feed that information to the schools, and then that's one piece of information they will take into consideration. So in this context, we're asking the research community to help us in staging this recovery effort. And most immediately, we would like the PIs to think about planning on how they're going to be working with their lab and structuring the comeback. We are centrally ordering supplies and using systems we have in place to create tracking, self-attestation, health status, and training, and others. All of these are happening at the same time. So more details in coming days on research ramp up to phase two. And I want to thank you. And now Liz and I will answer some of the questions. Let me go over to the questions page here. So let me come out of the slide screen. So I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. So now let me look at the questions. Okay. The first question is, when and under what conditions can we bring and work with students, graduate and undergraduate, postdocs, and technical staff in our lab and in our offices? So I'm going to take a shot at this, and then Liz can chime in. So we're working to create a process, as I described, to apply to bring your lab and personnel, including graduate students, back on grounds in a safe and careful manner. Of course, the lab staff, postdocs are all included. And but as far as undergraduates are concerned, I think we have decided that that's not something that we should do on phase one. That's our feeling here, and that is subject to fall 2020 committee talking about undergraduates. So that's not the purview of research at this point. So other than that, as long as the processes are done correctly, your graduate students, postdoc, and other staff can come in. And undergraduates, again, it's a broader question that Liz may want to address. Liz?
I agree with everything you said. We could go on to the next question.
Okay. The next question is, with the hiring freeze, it's not possible to complete proposed research activities as proposed. Can these policies be modified to allow to hire fully funded sponsored awards? I know there's a process for doing this. Liz, would you like to expand on that?
Sure. So the basic line is that a staff hire is actually in the purview of the dean and the dean's office. So if you have approval of a staff hire, and I would think, I mean, schools will make these decisions themselves, but if you have fully funded individual, I've seen some of those waivers go through. Request to hire a faculty member routes through the dean to the provost's office, and we are entertaining those exceptions to the hiring freeze and have granted some with searches that were in progress and have promising candidates where we want to make an offer. So that's the simple answer.
Thank you, Liz. So this is a question on field research. Like I said, we are focused on on-grounds research so far. So this question is, many university researchers conduct their work at field stations where the conditions are remote and it's outdoor. The considerations regarding best safe practices will be different than on grounds. Working at field stations is also seasonal. So what is the policy? That's the question. My first cut response is absolutely, we do understand field-based research. Now, field-based research depends not only on on-grounds policy, but also the field station policies. If it's a public school or a shared laboratory for particle physics, there are policies that exist. So we have to be, in your ramp-up process, having to go there. Also, the travel comes into play. Travel restriction should be lifted for you to do field-based work. So putting it all together, the field-based research should be coordinated with on-grounds guidelines, as well as the guidelines of your field stations. So as long as you can meet both of those, I think, and then the travel restriction are lifted, you're able to go. I think that's one aspect of this for consideration. Again, the schools are developing the specific policies. I'm just giving you the highlights of, we did discuss, and we do have this in the document. This is the level, and then you have a deeper dive guidance that will be from the schools that could be discipline specific. And anything to add on that, Liz? Okay. Is there going to be a planned staggering schedule to limit the number of individuals in the lab at a particular time? And so to this, for a lab, this is a crucial element of a PI planning for ramp up. This is going to require the use of space in your lab, making lists, etc., the process that I described. So you can use a staggering schedule. The answer is yes. If that will allow your throughput and the safe execution of your critical projects, yes, by all means, think about that. And I know that there are a couple other questions that came about saying that if we stagger the schedule, please ask more than one person to be in the lab for safety reasons. So don't allow just one person coming at midnight to work alone. Type of thing. That again, I think is the PI that wrote to me is very thoughtful, and I'm sure in his lab he's not going to allow that to happen, because that's going to be part of the policy that he put forward in the planning, that in the scheduling. It's not going to be one person scheduled to be alone in the lab at midnight. That's not going to happen. I think the PIs have full control over how they stagger the work. Of course, there's building restrictions that might be there. That is something you have to coordinate with the schools who manages the access, building access there. Okay, let's see. Is there going to be regular mandatory checkups on serological testing available? Okay, it is the short answer is we don't have a large-scale serological testing available. But in our current plans, just as the health system is doing, we are using self-attestation as a mechanism for your current health. We do not plan to do physical testing of individuals, and due to privacy issues, we're not going to ask you those details. But this is an evolving situation. As testing becomes ubiquitous, it may be in your own interest, and you want to test and be sure that you're okay. But that's far away. So at this point, we have serological testing is not part of this planning. I think self-attestation mechanism is what we are doing, and we hopefully plan to couple that with the in buildings where you have badge swipe-based entry. We couple this with the swipe-based entry, so that if you say you're ill, then we can trace back who you have been in contact with, etc., based on the swipes. But we don't know the extent to which we can do this, but we will be collecting the data in the front end to get this going. Any additions, Liz? Any question, please feel free to jump in. Okay, so
Go ahead, Ram.
I'm seeing additional questions popping up, so I'm keeping track of additional things. Okay, yeah, there are some good questions that are coming in live, so let's go through these questions, and then is there going to be an online training for people to allow to get back? I think I mentioned that in the presentation. Yes, we will have an online safety module that you have to complete as a prerequisite to enter. In fact, it will have good safety practices and so on and so forth in that online training. Yes, answer is yes. What protection is needed? Is it available? Who will pay for it? Good question. We have listed face covering as a requirement. Again, as researchers, I think we want to be a role model for following safety guidelines based on the science we know, for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And these are the only things that work. For lack of a vaccine, for lack of very effective therapeutics that will get us up and running in half an hour, in half a day, I think social distancing, face covering is required. So that's the PPE we are thinking across the board. But some labs do, for the nature of their work, they actually use N95 masks and so on. So of course, they will have one. Now, one of the things that we are talking about is the practicality of how, so I talked about timeliness. So many institutions have done that if you have your own personal mask, that cloth mask that you bought online, whatnot, that's a good start to have that at a minimum. And the centralized purchase and distribution of 2 cloth masks per researcher is being contemplated and worked on. So in that case, that's it. You get 2, and then you use 1 while you wash and dry the other, and so on, and you continue to go on. Beyond that, it's your responsibility to have your mask. So in that sense, initially we will try to get the supply as soon as possible. So that, as you know, this is the supply of it's a cloth mask, disposable mask. It's not readily available. There's a back order on these. So initially, we would think that the face covering, personal face covering that you already have, will be acceptable. But we will give you some specifications in the document. EHS will have some specifications on that. So it's not just any cloth. Okay. And who will? Is it available? I think I've answered that. And who will pay for it? We are looking at this centrally to do this. Any additions to that, Liz? Okay. Thanks. Okay, so let's see. The next question is, what accommodations might we consider for vulnerable individuals? Okay, so this, I'll take a shot at it, and Liz, please chime in. We have talked about this. You mentioned this in your kickoff talk, that how we dealt with graduate students. No individual should be pressured to come onto grounds if they had health concerns for this initial phase of ramp up. So they're doing carefully to phased ramp up. This is the part of PI's planning. If they know the vulnerability of their staff and employees in the lab, and then making sure that they're willing and able. And as we move into later stages, we'll look for ways to help these individuals reintegrate. That's all I have on that. Liz, your thoughts on that?
It's a good and kind of complex question, and Ram's referring partly to graduate students. I think the broader question is the normal accommodations that might be provided to someone who, because of health risk factors, would need a reasonable accommodation in the workplace. And we have existing policies and processes around such requests, and we're looking closely at them for faculty, staff, and students. And there may be some updated guidance, but the existing process for accommodation, if an individual believes, has a health condition that means they do not want to be doing the work that they're being asked to do. That's the process that exists now. So I hope that's helpful. I agree with Ram that we do not want anyone to feel pressured to participate. Okay.
Thanks, Liz. The next question is, it says, my question relates to research that is community or home-based. For example, research that involves deploying sensor technology into homes of patients with cancer. Will this be permitted? If so, what are the additional requirements anticipated beyond existing social distancing requirements? I'll provide a general answer, but actually the short answer is to work with human subjects experts that provide work on IRB and asking research compliance. But generally, community and field-based work, we will have specific guidelines. Much of this work will depend on community or area-specific rules. I know there was a PI that was working on collecting samples from homes. Research that involved collecting samples from homes. So the question was, if the community would leave the sample outside the door in a paper bag and they close the door, I go and collect it, will that be okay? Again, those are one-off, and then we just have to make sure that our research compliance officials look at what is involved and make recommendations. Yeah, thank you for that question. In the health system, our clinical research personnel are well acquainted with the new guidelines and requirements as part of health system's approach to clinical patient care. Using these health system guidelines, maybe cautiously resume clinical trials which are currently halted. So in this case, again, under the broader safety guidelines, when we talk about off-grounds and human subjects research, it's the participant safety has to be explicitly addressed as you make these requests, as well as safety of the research team members. You don't know who you're interacting with and how that will be addressed, and ensuring safety of the researcher and the participant. So the investigators should evaluate the risks involved and benefits, do a risk-benefit analysis, and make reasonable decisions so that you can decide when to start that kind of work. Human subjects research, IRB, folks will be glad to help you with that, how to structure it. Our research is heavily dependent on library resources. Many of these are available online: books, articles, databases, but some are not. Particularly periodicals or books not in e-form, and that requires getting copies and sending it to folks. And the question is, could we come into the library? Could we allow access to the space for research? When will special collections be open? And when will Alderman services resume? So this question is something we posed to the library. And Liz, do you want to address this part of the question?
If you'd like, these are a series of responses from John Unsworth, the Dean of Libraries, to this specific question about the heavy dependence on library resources. This is what his response was. The Classics Library, which was referenced in that question, is a departmental library, and access to that physical space is up to that department in that library. But the library more broadly is doing lots of scanning for research purposes, and that stopped and is going to resume soon. He suggests working with your subject liaison. I hope you have one. If you don't, write to John and find out who your subject liaison would be to find materials that are not currently in the library here that you need. If you want me to go on, I can answer a series of questions about the library that we had in addition to that, Ram, if that makes sense.
If you had anything that you think is significant that the audience should know, please go ahead.
The library, I guess probably most important, the library is working on contactless delivery of print materials for the summer as an alternative to scanning of all sorts of materials and mailing materials. That's in particular for people who might be away or doing field research where they need materials from the library or from special collections, which is also thinking about this option as well on the same schedule. The Alderman Stacks will not be opening anytime soon. The whole building's closed for reconstruction. Those are the highlights, and we can follow up with written responses further, but those were John's highlights.
Wonderful, thank you, Liz. The next question is to do with a bit of financial considerations. So in this case, my funder tells me that this is field research that people have been paid and not unable to work, etc., saying that my funders are telling me that the practice related to helping offset these costs that impact the overall project cost will depend on what the university practice policy is. We're fully aware of that policy. And they're asking, this question is, can you provide us general understanding of the approach the university is taking and what information we should be tracking to help inform such costs? This is the idea that we are going to be, the university as a university policy currently is to pay for people if they cannot be reassigned, finally they are not able to work, they will be paid. That was the original March 17th, I think March 13th message from the president, and as a result, you can continue to charge grants because it's consistent with the university policy. The question is, what is the university policy, and can I continue to do that? This is a complicated question that many VPRs are talking about in terms of the congruence between the university policy and what the funding agencies, the charging to funding policy would be. So this is a very dynamic situation, and the agencies also continue to give us some, more and more guidelines on more clarity on what can be charged, etc. So this is a complex question, but I think the current policy, as of now, the current policy as it stands, charging to a grant, if the agency has said that you can charge if you're consistent with university policy, you should continue to do so. The day we change our policy at the university, then you will not be able to charge, but that's not here yet. Liz, any comments on that?
Everything you said is correct.
Thank you, Liz. We'll need to develop protocols for disinfecting instrument surfaces. Will we need to develop protocols for disinfecting instrument surfaces between bookings of already trained users? Yeah, the trained users versus disinfecting, these are two different things. It's the user that before and after will do the cleaning. That seems to be the best practice. If you think about the safety of the person coming into use, you expect that the previous person has cleaned it thoroughly. And when you leave, you want to be sure that the next person getting on, because you know where you touched, so you want to be sure that you clean up. So that's the best practice. And we're creating an online training that will include that practice. Again, going back to taking responsibility for not for our safety alone, but safety of the others, that should drive that behavior. And our training will clarify the cleaning processes. Will UVA require COVID-19 testing to return to grounds? Currently, from a research point of view, for the phases that we are dealing with, no. At this point, we're not talking about every person coming into the lab should be tested. Individuals are required to self-attest. That's to the extent that we're doing this right now, and the health system has already in place. and we're going to leverage that hopefully. Liz, any comments on that question?
I guess what you've said is accurate as far as we know right now. I mean, that's our current plan. As we think about the fall, we're having lots of conversations about testing, sampling, prevalence testing, population testing, serology. And of course, I think all of us who are reading the newspaper, and many of you are in these fields, are hoping for a great breakthrough here. But I would say what we do in the fall when all of our 25,000 students are back is an open question, along with our staff and faculty. But what you described, yes, that's what we're doing now for the research ramp up.
Thank you, Liz. The next question is, what is the plan for opening shared lab spaces and facilities? Multiple lab safety, how can multiple labs safely return to a space they share? So this is, they're talking about core facilities used to numerous uses of the same instrument with multiple people at multiple times in a day. So if you're talking about shared common areas where you congregate and work, that has to be rearranged so that you don't work there simultaneously if you cannot maintain the social distancing guidelines. So in general, if it's a shared common area that is assignable for congregating and working, that under these guidelines will be largely unavailable if you try to follow the guideline in the first phase of the plan. The core facility is an important aspect of our ramp up. That's one of the things we're doing in the background, working with the School of Medicine, the college, and engineering to find out what are the core facilities that have, what's the status, and are they up and running. Once the faculty has, the PI has approved a plan to work, do they have all the resources they need? That's what is keeping us from nailing down a date, as long as we have this few of these important cores up and running. The next, yes, Liz, please.
Well, I just one thought. I'm trying to answer questions in the chat. If I know the answer, not getting ahead of you, I think in any way.
Go ahead.
But I think there are a lot of questions about human subject research, and I'm wondering if you could talk about what is in the proposed plan related to human subject research.
The current, the social sciences, humanities, human subject research current status in our phase 1 is you can do human subject research as long as you don't have face-to-face contact. It's remotely done. And ramping that up to a face-to-face contact is something that has to be done on a case-by-case basis, making sure, like I said earlier, the participant safety, as well as the safety of the researcher and what kind of PPEs they may have to wear in order to do the work. That's our compliance folks will be happy to. They're developing a plan for that as to what those are, and that will be posted in addition to the other ramp up processes. And okay, I think I see the human subjects.
I think I stopped you when you wwere talking about PPE, and then this last question of shared. You did do the shared lab space and facilities question.
Shared lab space, and then there's an interesting question. My lab is already up and running without students and with only key personnel. So in other words, all my personnel are key. My lab is already running. With my current personnel, will my current personnel be subject to safety policies as for new entrants? That's a good question. Since the safety guideline, for example, we talk about when new people come in, I don't know if in this lab they required face covering at all times or not. So if they did not, the new policy guidance will apply to an existing lab that's operating to make sure that it's compatible. Because you can't have one lab that has 3 people that don't use face coverings and then rest of them coming in wear face covering. That defeats the whole purpose. So I think the current lab must submit a plan And since you're operating and re-evaluate the safety guidelines and be sure that it's reapproved to continue to phase 2. And then if you have to add personnel, that's part of the thing. Even if you don't add personnel, I would think that the schools would want to assess that, because that could be the weak link that could break. Okay, and let's see. Here's questions. More questions coming up. Okay. Oh, this is a question I'm not. Yeah, this keeps coming up. Let's do this. How do you define critical research? Now, thinking as a PI, the critical research is not always COVID-19 or any life-saving research. It's the critical research because everybody's research is important. So when you are working on a technology or a hypothesis, etc., in your list of things that you have that you do, if you say that that's what defines your field, that's what defines who you are, and that's critical to you in terms of if you don't pursue that, your career is going to stop where it is if you can publish in that, etc. And critical research is another part where we came across Liz, that this is a 4th-year student, PhD student, and there is this last bit that this person has to do, and that's critical, regardless of topic, because it's when you look at the academic pathway for the student, if that is not done, that is, that stops somebody's pathway to graduation. So, it's not, critical is not a judgment of value. Critical research is in your lab, you look at all the work that you do and what is the most critical. The purpose of this critical research, twofold, like I said, that's the stay-at-home order allows for that, that's one. That's the bureaucratic reason. But the more important reason is, again, going back to the shared responsibility. If I think that all my research can wait, it's not going to affect my career, it's not going to affect the student, they can wait 2 months. That allows for the density management across the board to allow for other research that could come in. So in that sense, be critical of yourself yeah, so be critical of what it is and see the research that you think you want to, here is, you can ramp up. So what part of your portfolio that you want to ramp up that's critical to keep you going, maintain your identity and reputation, etc. So I hope this helps. This is not a value judgment based critical research. And let's talk about, there's a lot of question on clinical human subject question. And this is for that human subject work. Dave Hudson is actually prepared a set of guidance, again, with a basic premise of protecting both parties. And technicalities on that, that is, if you already have an established protocol and if you modify that, and should that be should it be run through the process, etc. These are very technical questions that Dave Hudson in my office can help, but he is putting together a plan that will be posted. In fact, the document will say that's the additional document for human subject, clinical human subject work. So that will be available. And there is here's the question again. This really shows absolutely, we need to do this soon. Where do we submit our plans for our lab? And where is the website? So that's exactly the piece. I mean, the last slide that I showed you, the dependencies of getting this up and running as fast as we could. Really, people in my office, Cheryl is working on the website infrastructure, and Ron Hutchins is helping with it, etc. So we're putting together as soon as we can. So we don't have a website to point out yet, but very soon, matter of days, I think we will have something going there. And in the meantime, the reason for timeliness is rather than wait for this to be up and running, the key guidance document will tell you what the the safety expectations are. And then you can look at your lab and start planning. So when this is ready, you should be able to upload the information. That's the direction we are going. And let's see. If preparations and conditions can be met, will this be allowed prior to the governor's lifting of stay-at-home requirement? Like I said, our interpretation, that's the reason that if you have a critical research in your lab that needs to happen, that involves grad students or so on, our interpretation, yes, and we're going ahead with doing that initial ramp up. Yes, the answer is yes. And okay, can you comment on? Yeah, I understand we don't have an exact date, but how will I know what progress is being made? So I would ask that, I'd ask for your patience for, we will provide at least, ask for your patience. I don't think we'll have something tomorrow. Tomorrow you will have the document we are talking about, but we will post on our VPR website updates on where we are and additional, for example, any additional forms that are developed, etc. We will be glad to share on a draft form, so with full understanding that this is in progress, but to a point that it is close to finishing. So please check our VPR office COVID-19 site for such information. And will we be allowed to use homemade mask or mask brought from home? Like I said, our goal is to give you 2 cloth masks, but that's not going to be something that will stop you. If we are not able to come up with it in time, and you're all ready and you have a homemade mask, we will provide some guidelines on it as to what that should look like. And yes, the answer would be that is not going to be stopping your progress. And will buses and public transportation be available? Yeah, I have to check with the operation. I don't know, Liz, would you know? I don't know the answer to that question, but that's something that we will find out. We'll get to the answer on that.
And then, Ram, I think we have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to be clear. You're going to make your slides available and then the full plan tomorrow.
Exactly.
Just 2 things I'd say, and you should close us out, Ram. We got a very large amount of input, Ram did, from the deans, the research deans, lots of PIs, department chairs, but this session was intended to field any question, especially to see if there's something we haven't thought about yet that we need to think about. And at least for me, there's several questions that have been raised that I haven't yet focused on. Ram and his shop probably has, but incredibly useful. I think the second reason for this session was there was some worry that we weren't paying attention to this. And we certainly were, but it wasn't maybe that visible. So we wanted to invite everybody and anyone who wanted to join and learn where we are. I understand we've described where we are without a lot of the documents yet, but that's partly because we've gotten a bunch of input here that may help us as we refine those documents. But another point was to gather the community and make sure folks understood this has been a very high priority around the clock kind of work, which I know all of you are doing as well, or would like to be doing on your research, even if you're not able to do it right now, to get to this point. And lots of conversations between and among provosts and VPRs and that got us to this point. So that was the last thing I wanted to say. And thank you for coming and all of your questions. I tried to answer ones where I knew I could answer pretty accurately, but you'll have to await more accurate answers after we can see them all with Ram and his shop. But let me give it back to you for the last word, Ram.
Absolutely, thank you, Liz. And again, as we discussed, phase 1 is underway now, and we're working feverishly to get this all up and running. And we could, based on the number of questions, as soon as we announced the town hall, the number of questions that came up really told us that you're all anxious. We totally understand. And we couldn't work any harder, and really I'm confident of that. So we will continue to do that and get to the end point as quickly as possible. So continue to, if you have questions, as Liz said, again, we are paying enormous attention to this, and we are close. So please continue to send questions if you have more on this, and we have captured the Q&A questions. And thank you for submitting all your questions and tuning into this town hall. And we look forward to working with you and each and every one of you, and ramp up research in a timely, safe, and sustainable manner. Okay, thank you. Bye now.